I want to talk to you about what I learned from the tech industry. And this isn't some app, not like, Headspace or Calm or nothing like that. I want to talk about this because I genuinely believe that you can learn from just about anything, just about anyone, anywhere, anything. If you choose to, you can really look at things and learn from it, use it for your growth. So I thought maybe in the next couple of videos, I'd share some examples of how I did this. And today I want to talk about the tech industry because I have a friend who started a company in the tech industry. And I was helping him with something. And there was a meeting with me and some other people on his team. And he said something. See, they're trying to launch some new service, right? Now, what he said was, the thing that you need to keep in mind is when a company is a startup, when you're launching a new product or service, you need to separate between two things. You need to separate what is your, how you're going to scale away from just getting your first few sales. So what that means is, if you're thinking about how do I ramp this up and how do I get lots and lots of clients and can do these big campaigns and stuff, in the very beginning, you don't actually know 100% until you have experienced it what will work in terms of marketing. Like maybe set the product or service aside. We'll just assume that that is good. But do people want it, right? It's not a question of delivering on it. It's a question of getting people to come and actually pay you money for that product or service. So in that phase, you have to build, trust. You have to maybe build a website. You have to have everything in place. You have to figure out your marketing funnel. How are you going to reach people? All those things. So to get your first few customers, it may take a lot more time, effort, energy that you need to put into it to actually see what's working, what's not working, how are you reaching them, how do you speak to them, all that kind of stuff. And then once you get that rolling, then you can start thinking about scaling. But until that point, this idea of scaling should be nowhere in your mind. It should not leave your lips. You shouldn't even be anywhere thinking about that. Only focused on where you're at right now. I thought, while it's somewhat simplistic, somewhat logical, and very practical, very almost obvious, it actually wasn't obvious because I have made this mistake many times in the past. So I thought maybe I can just share this in a way that how I learned from this or how you could maybe apply it, because I've done this so many times where, not just in a business, just about anything. I'm a kind of person that, or at least I certainly was when I was younger, where I had all kinds of ideas and I would start thinking. And when I started thinking about the idea, I'd get excited and I'd start sort of planning out. And you end up, at least in my case, over planning to the point where you're thinking about what you're going to do 5, 6 steps ahead, but you haven't actually figured out step 1 and 2. And I did this so many times for all sorts of different things. And there's another basic concept that is called diluting your resources, which is another way of saying you're putting too much time, effort, energy into different directions and not enough in the necessary ones for your next steps. We'll use travel as an example because I'm someone who has traveled before. So when you're first getting ready to travel, if you start thinking about, I want to travel to 20 countries and I want to stay in like you start, basically, if you've never traveled anywhere, then you might have seen in movies or TV shows, you might have seen online some YouTuber or some Instagrammer or like whatever. You've seen somebody traveling. And the only thing you know about travel is what you've read or seen and not what you've experienced. So you have these ideas in your head. I want to go on these mountains. I want to go to this beach. I want to see this island. Do all the things that you've seen, but you don't know all the other stuff that comes with it. So if you start thinking about it like that, you'll spend a lot of time looking on Pinterest and going on YouTube or Instagram, looking at all the places, making your lists of all the places you want to go. But the thing you need to figure out in the beginning is basic stuff like, how are you going to, you need a passport, right? And you probably need to figure out some visas for some countries. You need to figure out how are you going to carry everything. There's so many steps, which in the beginning, because you're not worried about scaling, if you just focus on this stuff, you have to figure out all these different aspects. Like, is there clean water? Do I need to get a water filter? Am I going to carry a backpack, or do I need a suitcase? Where am I going? What's more practical? Like, there's so many different little things to figure out. So it's going to take a lot more time, effort, and energy. And if you dilute your resources, looking in a bunch of different directions, you make it more difficult. It's going to take longer. You might even get overwhelmed and burnt out when you start looking at all that stuff. And you also need to figure out things like money. Like, if you don't have a ton of money, how are you going to make it? So your energy, your effort will be best spent focusing on the steps in front of you and getting that first product or service, the first customers, to use the tech example, before you start thinking about scaling and hitting all these beaches and beautiful locations. So this is something which you can apply to a lot of things in your life. And I found a sailboat to actually be a good analogy for this. Because if you think about a sailboat in the old days, like think like a pirate ship, those big wooden ones with the big square sails and lots of pirates on them and like whatever. That kind of sailing. Suppose you're talking when the Europeans were first traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. At that time, they didn't even know if there was anything over there. They didn't know how far it was, if there was something over there, and how difficult it'd be to cross. Like, there's so many question marks. And not only that, the sailboats they had were big, they were heavy, they required a lot of people to crew them. And so a lot of people means you need places for them to sleep, you need food and water and all that kind of stuff for them. And they have to be able to get back too, right? So there's so many logistical questions. And then because it's big and slow and heavy, it takes a long time to cross, to go however far they're going. So because it takes more time, you need that much more food and water, which gets more weight. And again, you're going even slower. It's like a whole thing. So contrast that to modern day sailboats. Today, it's very much possible for a teenage girl to travel all the way around the world in a sailboat, that she can sail all by herself. And you can go on Netflix or probably YouTube and see many people who have done this, teenagers trying to set world records for circumnavigating the globe, sailing around the world by themselves. It's crazy. It's super cool. And that was never possible in the days of the early stuff, because that is a process of, first we figured out how to cross one body of water. Then we kept refining and figuring out how to make the boat go a little faster, how to make it lighter, how to keep adjusting. And of course, we reduced the amount of piracy. So you reduce the amount of cannons you need on a boat and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, things got refined, things got streamlined. We figured out how to mass produce boats. So the scaling happened. But you can't think about any of that when your first goal is, how do I cross the ocean? It was the same when they were flying across the ocean. The first person to fly was Charles Lindbergh. Do you know that in his very first plane that he flew across the ocean, he only had a window like this big to look out in the front? And they did it that way because they're just trying to figure out how to make the plane actually have enough fuel and make it all the way. So they thought, well, there's nothing to see in the ocean. Let's reduce the window, have more clusters of gauges and all that kind of stuff. And that's how they were able to make it work. Of course, nowadays we have many Boeings and all these other big airplanes you can take on commercial flights or even private jets. But that's all mass produced. That's all scaling. That's refining the process. So you're going to start just figuring out how to get across, and you have to put more energy into it in the beginning. I say all this because, as I said, I made this mistake so many times where I just didn't put the energy where it needed to go. I didn't focus on the process of whatever I was doing. I instead focused on some goal that I didn't even understand, or started imagining a whole big extravagant plan, but I hadn't figured out some of the fundamentals yet. So That's why in the startup world, they focus on just figuring out your first few customers first and then scaling. And similarly, you can apply this to just anything, whether it's traveling or if you want to learn new languages or even things to do with your inner growth. Like, how do I, if you want to, focus more on yoga and meditation and stuff like this, then there are some fundamentals you should figure out before you start trying to go be in silence, for 10 days or whatever. There's a few things that would be ideal for you to start building up your foundations before you start attempting other things like that. And if you start dreaming about these big ideas, you might end up sort of going all over the place, getting burnt out, or not getting confused, not knowing where to go, getting into things which you're not really ready for. And there's so many problems that can come from that. And this is just from my own experience, this has happened. I don't want that to happen to you. I would like, it'd be really great if you're able to grasp this, because then you can work more efficiently and use the pretty brief life that we have as well as possible. And that's what I want for you. So I hope this made sense and you're able to make use of it and implement it in your life. And yeah, that's all I have for today. So I will see you in the next one.